Chapter 7. Bike riding to Muston. The first thing that Sam had noticed about life in Filey was the air. It rolled in, unseen, across the glittering North Sea, reaching into the streets and narrow ginnels to caress everything that it touched. After just 4 days in his new home, Sam could feel his lungs begin to be cleansed of London's dust and grime with every deep breath that he took. The air felt so crisp and clean that standing in Mrs. Ward's cliff-top garden and filling his chest had become a morning addiction. Even the squawking seagulls were beginning to recognise him. "It won't run out, you know." Sam didn't need to turn around to know that his host was standing in the garden behind him. Mrs. Ward was a kind woman. She had welcomed Sam into her house like an aunt and had made him feel wanted. Part of her morning ritual was to hang the damp washing out on a thin clothesline, which stretched from one corner of her garden to the next. Sam often helped her. "I like the way it tastes," he told Mrs. Ward. "Don't be silly, Samuel," she laughed, passing him a handful of wooden pegs and a couple of his freshly washed shirts. "Air doesn't taste of anything." "Yes, it does," Sam insisted. He hadn't yet told Mrs. Ward that only his mother ever called him Samuel. He was still unsure whether he would ever correct her. He quite liked the familiarity. "I can taste the sea." Mrs. Ward kept smiling. "What does the air smell like in London?" Sam was surprised by how hard he had to think. He'd been away from home for less than a week, yet the memories of London were already fading. "Usually people, horses and old dirt." He drew thick tendrils of salty air through his both nostrils. "And the morning after the bombs have fallen, you can usually smell the smoke." Mrs. Ward landed a hand gently onto his shoulder. "Well, you're safe from all that here. I've written to your mother to tell her how well you've settled in, and I've told her you're happy here. That's true, isn't it?" The question surprised him. It wasn't something that he had really thought about. War had taught him to take one day at a time and to just get on with things. It seemed that nobody thought much about being happy anymore. War wasn't a happy thing. "I don't know," he said. "I'm not unhappy, but I miss my mum. I hope she's safe." "Yesterday's Daily Express said the bombing had eased off a little," Mrs. Ward assured him. "Mr. Churchill says fewer bombers have been getting through. Those Spitfire pilots are more than a match for Jerry's flyers." Her lips twitched into what looked like a mischievous grin. "Do you know, I always thought we called him Jerry because it was short for Germans. But it was my Henry who explained it's actually because their helmets look like jerry pots." Sam shrugged. "Jerry pots?" "A jerry pot. A chamber pot, you know, a portable loo." Mrs. Ward sniggered. Sam forced himself to smile. If he were back in London, surrounded by his school friends, that fact would have had them all laughing for hours. Yet today, he could hardly raise a smirk. "Do you think Lily's happy?" He felt Mrs. Ward's hand leave his shoulder as she focused on hanging out the remaining garments. When they'd filled the clothesline, she took back the remaining wooden pegs. "I'm sorry, Samuel." "For what?" Her sigh sounded heavy. "For not trying harder to take Lily. I have the room, and my husband always said we should try for a daughter. Having Lily stay would have been good practice." Sam shrugged and looked out over the garden fence, watching sunlight bounce off the sea like glints from a million diamonds. "Mrs. Scales can be an intimidating woman," his host continued, "and I don't know how I'd cope with another person in the house. All this is strange for us too." Sam had never even considered that. Guilt coloured his cheeks. "Why don't you go and see her?" "Lily?" Sam was shocked. So far, the London children had been forbidden from leaving Filey. Councillor Bentley had insisted that they all stay close to home to help the settling in process. "Families are important," replied Mrs. Ward. Her smile was warm and her brown eyes shone kindly. "Especially in times like these. You'll find a bicycle next to the fishing net in the shed. It belongs to Henry. I mean, Mr. Ward. It might be a little big, but I'm sure you'll get used to it." "Where will I find her?" Sam asked. He hadn't seen Lily on any of the short visits he'd made into Filey's compact town centre. None of the other children had seen her either. Don't worry, Samuel. She hasn't vanished, Mrs. Ward assured her. Mrs. Scales and her husband own a farm in Muston. It's a few miles away, at the end of the next village. The road out of Filey takes you straight past their wheat fields. Are you sure it's okay? Sam paused. I thought we couldn't leave Filey. Mrs. Ward's reassuring wink sent a flutter of excitement rumbling through his belly. I won't tell if you don't. Sam was used to seeing soldiers. London streets were full of them. Yet even he was surprised by the number of military vehicles and personnel that he saw on the road outside the seaside town. Most of them seemed to belong to the RAF. None of them seemed particularly pleased to be sharing the tarmac with him. Get off the road, one driver hollered from a noisy Land Rover. Several more hooted their horns as Sam tried to steer his bicycle safely. Mrs. Ward had been correct. The bike was slightly too big for him. It was heavy too, which made it difficult to control, especially up steep hills. Eventually, a trooper carrier pulled over in front of him, piled high with what looked like stacks of mattresses. The engine belched thick, black diesel fumes as the driver sprang out of its cab. Sam swallowed hard as the soldier marched towards him. The pistol slung in a holster around the man's waist was an intimidating sight. Stepping directly into Sam's path, the soldier raised his flat palm. Stop right there! Sam tugged on the stiff brake and wobbled his bike to a squealing halt. The soldier glared at him suspiciously. Is this your bike? No. I mean, yes, Sam spluttered. I borrowed it. It's too big for you, the soldier observed. If you keep riding like you have been, you'll end up getting yourself killed. We've got more important things to worry about than trying to avoid silly little children, you know? Sorry. Sam looked down at the road, hiding from the soldier's angry eyes as he climbed off the bike. Where are you heading? The soldier asked. His tone had softened slightly. Muston. It's not far. Sam had passed a road sign a few turns earlier. Muston had only been 1 mile away. I'll walk the rest of the way. No, you won't. The soldier grabbed the bike's handlebars and firmly pulled it away from Sam. He lifted it above his head, as if the heavy iron bike was made from card, and slid it into the back of his truck, wedging it between 2 stacks of mattresses. Get in front. I'll drop you off. Once they were driving, the soldier had to yell to make himself heard above the rattling engine. You don't sound like you're from round these parts. Are you one of those evacuee kids? Sam nodded. Sounds like you're from London, the soldier continued. Like me. When Sam turned to look at him, the man was smiling. Nice to hear a familiar accent. Sam nodded again. I'm from Highbury, the soldier told him. You will get used to all this peace and quiet, and the space too. The empty fields and hedges rolling past his window reminded Sam how different the Yorkshire countryside was to the bustling streets of London. The people aren't so bad either, the soldier assured him, once you get used to them. The truck's engine rumbled noisily, rattling the bare metal floor beneath Sam's feet as the vehicle roared into Muston. The soldier slowed his truck as a narrow road sent them weaving through a cluster of cottages and terraces. As they passed a church, he asked, Where do you want dropping off? Is there a farm in the village? The soldier nodded. His face creased, as if he had just sucked a slice of raw lemon. It's run by the Scales family. Why do you want to go there? My cousin Lily is staying with them. Well, I hope she likes hard work, the soldier said, shaking his head as he slowed the truck to a standstill. He pointed to a large iron gate sitting at the entrance to what appeared to be a private road. From what I've heard, Scales' farm makes those old Victorian workhouses look like luxury hotels. Sam felt like somebody had just punched him in the stomach as he climbed out of the truck's cabin. He walked around to the driver's door to find the soldier leaning through the open window. I'll keep the bike for now. But, the man smiled, don't worry, you can have it back, but I'd rather you walked home. There's less chance of you having an accident. How will I get it back? Come to the RAF base at Hunmanbury Moor, the man told him. Then, Seeing the bewildered expression on Sam's face, he laughed. It's only a couple of miles down the road from Filey. It's where a bloke called Butlin will be opening a holiday camp when this damn war is over. If I'm not there, I'll be at St Margaret's Primary School in the village. We've commandeered it for extra billets, and we move an entire company of 200 men in next Thursday. I'm on mattress transport duty. Ask for Corporal Timmins. Before driving away, Corporal Timmins fixed Sam with a concerned gaze. I hope your cousin is alright. He switched his attention to the heavy gate and pulled his lips tight. It's true, you know. You really do find out what people are like during wars. Chapter 8. A warning goes unheeded. The roughly painted sign tacked to the rusted iron gate confirmed that the property was Scales' farm. The scribbled words, "Keep out," made it clear that uninvited visitors were definitely not welcome. But Sam wasn't about to let a couple of words intimidate him, nor would he let them prevent him from checking on Lily. He just decided to make his house call in a more covert fashion. The farm itself appeared to be surrounded on 3 sides by fields of wheat and barley. Even though the crops hadn't yet been harvested, they offered Sam very little camouflage. The swaying stems hardly reached up to his chest, and even if he stooped, he would still be in clear view of the window of the grey stone farmhouse in the distance. To the left of the property and its outbuildings, perhaps shielding the building from the fierce winter gales and storms, sat a dense stretch of woodland. Once inside the first row of trees, Sam found that he could easily navigate his way from the road to the house completely unseen. He had only taken a few dozen steps inside the woods when the gentle rustle of leaves and the tweet of birdsong were disturbed by a piercing scream. Raised hairs tickled the back of his neck as he realized that it was a sound that he had heard before. The scream belonged to Lily. With his senses suddenly on high alert, Sam scanned the scrum of tree trunks for any sign of his cousin, but the only movement came from the dash of a squirrel as it moved from one tree to another. He was still moving forward when the next scream reached through the forest, this time even louder and closer. Lily was moving towards him, feeling disorientated and exposed. Sam threw a desperate gaze from left to right. He bounced from one tree trunk to the next, trying to work out where the screams were coming from. However, it wasn't Lily's third and final scream that filled Sam's limbs with adrenaline. It was the cruel howls and whoops of laughter that followed close behind it. His younger cousin was being hunted. Now he could hear the crashes and thumps of panic-stricken footsteps as they raced through the forest towards him. Flashes of movement caught his eye, and he followed the brief swishes of red hair until he finally caught sight of Lily sidestepping between tree trunks. His cousin's terrified sobs guided Sam forwards until Lily burst from between 2 narrow trunks and crashed straight into him. Luckily, Sam anticipated the impact. He met his cousin with a textbook rugby tackle, wrapping her in a protective embrace before throwing them both into a thick nest of bronzing bracken leaves. Just as Lily was about to scream again, Sam clamped his hand across her mouth and whispered into her ear, "Shh, it's me, Lils, I'm here." Close by, heavy footsteps clattered towards them. The catcalls of 2 loud males meant that his cousin's pursuers were close. Lily huddled against him, shaking like a feral creature. They would both squirm deep into the bracken, wriggling between and beneath the heavy russet leaves. "Don't let them find me," Lily whispered. The 2 cousins held their breath as twin sets of footprints drew closer and closer. When 4 heavy boots thumped into a standstill inches from the Londoners' heads, Sam could smell the damp mud on the closest boot sole. "We know you're here," the growling voice called over. "Our ma's gonna be madder than a rabid dog if we're not all back for lunch." "Aye," boomed a second voice, this one even deeper and more unfriendly than the first. "There's chores to do, and you're gonna cop it for keeping us out. You're already in ma's bad books for being a lazy scrounger." Sam felt his cousin's body tighten with anger. His voice was barely louder than a breath as he whispered into Lily's ear, "Don't say anything. They'll never find us." The 2 hunters stood their ground, clearly listening for any sounds of movement. When none came, the owner of the deepest voice broke the silence. "Daft mare has probably made her way back to farm." "Maybe," agreed his companion. "Or perhaps she's done a runner. Her ma'll tear her guts out if she tried to find that cousin of hers." Both sets of feet started to move away, kicking their way through the bracken and snapping twigs. Sam kept his younger cousin locked in his embrace until the footsteps had padded away into silence. Only then did the children scramble to their feet. "Who were they?" Sam asked. Lily brushed leaves and twigs from her clothes. "Vincent and Duncan. They're brothers." "Why are they looking for you?" "So they can throw me in the manure heap." "The what?" Lily shrugged. "They take deliveries from other farms. It's to spread on the wheat fields during autumn." "But why would they want to throw you in all that stuff?" "'Cause they're bullies," Lily said, "and nobody will stop them." Sam helped his cousin climb free of the bracken leaves. "What about Mrs. Scales? Doesn't she stop them?" "Ha!" Lily sneered. "She's worse than they are. If that wicked woman had her way, I'd live in the barn with the chickens. She treats me worse than one of her dogs." Sam could feel rage boiling a red rash across his neck. He clenched his fist tight. "I'm sorry, Lils. I didn't know." "It's not your fault." Sam shook his head. "I should have come sooner. I'm supposed to be looking after you." "No, Sam, you're not," Lily told him. "That's supposed to be Mrs. Scales' job, but she seems to think I'm here to work for her instead." Sam remembered one of the Scales' boys mentioning something about chores. That wasn't supposed to be part of the deal. They'd come north to find sanctuary, not slavery. "You're not going back," he insisted. "Mrs. Ward is a kind woman. She'll take you in, I'm sure." "Mrs. Scales will never agree to it," Lily said sadly. "She'll never give up the allowance and extra rations, even though I never see any of them." "But that food is meant for you," Sam said, shocked. "It's why Aunt Peg sends the money every week." Lily looked down at her scuffed shoes. "Well, it's being used to feed those boys of hers. I'm lucky if I get to eat their leftovers." Her eyes flicked up towards Sam, gazing across at him and with sudden hope. "Do you have any food on you, Sam? I'm starving." Sam dug into his pockets, eventually pulling out the remains of a half-eaten sandwich that Mrs. Ward had given him earlier. He was still trying to peel away the paper that it was wrapped in when Lily snatched it from his fingers. His jaw dropped open as he watched her cousin devour it in 2 huge bites. Her cheeks bulged as she chewed hungrily. "Can you bring more?" Lily asked. "Anything will do." "Come back with me now," Sam said. "I'll ask Mrs. Ward to cook you something nice for lunch. You can have my rations." Lily glanced over her shoulder in the direction of the farmhouse. Fear wrapped itself around her face like a mask. "I can't. Mrs. Scales expects me back to clean the stairs." She rubbed her arm and winced, as if it was tender. "I'm already in enough trouble." "You must get some time to yourself." Lily nodded. "Maybe tomorrow around 4. It's ration day, and Mrs. Scales wants me to collect this week's food from Filey." "Okay, that's it then," Sam said. "I'll meet you outside the gates at 4, and I'll bring you some food."